Welcome to our Hangout series, Innovation by Design, which is designed for innovation, design thinking, and IoT design experts to share what's working for them, as well as the tips that can make others more successful. And today, you are honored to be at the 21st Hangout in this series, and this will wrap our series for Innovation by Design. So you'll have to stay tuned for what comes next. And by the way, for all of the records of the 21 Hangouts, you can go to our website, altitudeinc.com/insights, which is in the chat, to access all of them for free. So we're very happy to have you here today for our Hangout topic, which is innovation, organizational innovation. Is your company prepared to pivot? Now, over the next hour, our innovation and design thinking experts will chat about how new technologies are causing a shift in skill sets today in businesses, and how this brings a growing need to have a culture open to innovation and change. In today's Hangout, our panelists will discuss why an innovative culture needs to be at the heart of companies today, and they'll share examples of companies who have shifted their culture through organizational innovation, the topic of today. Now, let me go ahead and introduce the panelists, and then we will get into their dialogue. So first, we have Diane Finkhausen. Hello, Diane.
Hey, Gretchen. Great to be here. Thanks.
She is Director of Open Innovation and Advanced Manufacturing and President of Fuse, which is a new business model for agile manufacturing. And Diane leads GE's Genius Link Group, which builds crowd-powered business models that accelerate innovation and improve performance. She collaborates closely with the GE business verticals, customers, and entrepreneurs to establish the company's vision for and execution of collaborative business models. So we're really happy to have Diane here. And we also have Aisha Tatiano, and she's Senior Innovation Consultant and Program Manager at Cisco. Prior to this role, we've had Aisha in our Hangouts as the VP of Innovation and Design Thinking at LPL Financial. So we're happy to have Aisha back. So you always give us great insights, Aisha. So thank you again for joining.
I love hanging out with you guys.
Aisha truly is an expert in the adoption of innovation and design thinking principles across the enterprise and on major projects and initiatives. And we have Joe Boyle, my comrade here at Accenture, Principal Director at Accenture's Talent and Organization Practice, and is focused on Accenture's communications, media, and technology clients. He focuses on helping clients navigate enterprise change and transformation, and Joe's collaborated with MIT researchers on post-merger integration case studies and is currently focused on the implications of automation and digital disruption on organizations and operating models as they shift to create a stronger culture of innovation. It's great to have you here, Joe.
Thanks so much for having me, Gretchen. Looking forward to the conversation.
On his vacation, so we're very honored. And I am Gretchen Hoffman, Vice President of Marketing at Altitude, and my role today is as the moderator. Altitude's a design and innovation consulting firm based in Boston, and we were acquired last year by Accenture's Product Innovation Group. So clients include Under Armour, Nike, Thermo Scientific, and more. And now, for why you're here, let's get into the panel dialogue on our topic, organizational innovation. Is your company prepared to pivot? So I think to kick this off, what would be helpful is, let's really start by talking about who leads innovation in your company and if this has changed over time. And Diane from GE, how about we have you jump in first?
Sure. Thanks, Gretchen. Really, everybody leads innovation at GE. Innovation is everyone's job at GE. We do have a Chief Innovation Officer at GE, which provides really the lighthouse for innovation priorities. We have, as you may know, we've always been a company with innovation at our heart, right? As it began with Edison many years ago, we have always been deeply committed to building new value and commercializing solutions that change the world for the markets and the customers that we serve. And just this past year, we have named a Chief Innovation Officer, Sue Siegel, in the organization. Sue, prior to ascending to Chief Innovation Officer for GE, she led the GE Ventures organization, still does, but in the GE Ventures role, Sue had her finger on the pulse of everything that was in the crosshairs of GE's innovation roadmap. So she was looking at emerging technologies, emerging models, emerging markets, and was just really the best resource to lead GE into this new digital industrial era. And so it's exciting. Sue is at the helm, and innovation is everybody's job at GE.
Wow, that's great to hear. Aisha, can I ask if I can do a quick test before you jump in
Sure.
on this? Can you test and see if you mute your microphone? Because we have some folks concerned about the background noise. I think it was came in when you joined. You know how you can do it at the top of your screen?
Yeah, I will try, but
Just let's see if the background noise goes away. No. Okay. Didn't. So come on back. All right. So while we're talking, maybe Diane or Joe, if you think you have any background noise or people talking that you can hear, if you can mute when we're not talking, that would be great, because I don't know where the background noise is. All right. So Aisha, could I ask you to jump in and address that question? Thank you.
Sure. So I'm fairly new to Cisco, still learning their system, only been there a couple months. But what I can say is there are many, many innovation groups across Cisco. They are embedded in all different ways in the organization. Primarily, we see them under operational leaders who are very strong presence in our company, right? And usually we see ourselves like nestled kind of underneath an operational leader as almost like a SWAT team. That's what I've seen the most here at Cisco, although we also have practices dedicated solely to the learning factors like design thinking, innovation, and those are all about showing up, learning, and then going back in the world and doing. And they do a pretty good job. So I would say that like many really innovative companies, I think everyone at Cisco would say innovation is their job. But what we organizationally look like is really kind of about supporting the farthest reaches possible of the principles. So because they're an 80,000 person company, they appropriately have many, many, many innovation groups across their landscape.
Excellent. I'm trying to figure out the background noise, and just for the folks listening in, I hope it's somewhat bearable. If it's not, I don't know what to tell you, because I know, Joe, you muted, and it's not from you. I don't know where it's coming from. I'm almost wondering if the wires are crossed. Like your cell phone, sometimes you can hear someone in the background, which is a little bit of a worry. So let's see how it goes here. So anyway, so great input. Thank you. Yes, I got a momentary distraction as I was trying to figure out that background noise, because I also can hear it. But let's see how we roll here. So let's talk, Aisha. Can you also talk a little bit further on, can you elaborate on how the past year's technological advances, like IoT, virtual reality, AR, AI, how they've impacted companies, how they're organizing to innovate?
Yeah. So I think what we're seeing now is exactly what we see anytime really disruptive technology hits the market. There are very, very few people, across the corporate landscape in America right now very few companies who are actually doing it and doing it well. And we're all looking at them and saying, I'd like to be a lot like that. But we're not really sure what the mechanics are. So what I've noticed is that these technologies, if I'm being frank, everyone is scrambling to embrace them and figure out how to bring them to market in a real, tangible way, which is it's in a way neat, because everyone's having a conversation around what could you do with this stuff, and in another way really, really disruptive, because it's very amorphous, it doesn't have scope, it's an emotionally tumultuous time because people know they need to do it but they're not really sure how. So what I just see is a lot of frenetic energy around these technologies, and not a lot of good visualization of the endpoint, right? Everyone is still imagining what all of this stuff could be. So it's almost, if we're thinking of the project management cycle, I think this is part of the problem, because we don't have a really clear vision of what it could be. We have a hard time going to do it. So it seems like as a group, across all of corporate America, we're in like the project initiation phase where we're still like, we know we want it. We know it's cool. We're still trying to figure out what to do with it. And everyone is just kind of, in my mind, quite frankly, from what I've seen, stumbling through that a little bit, learning as they go, as it always is with disruptive technology. But I would say in general, the state of it is a little bit disruptive, a little bit, I'm going to use one of my favorite words, like kind of in a kerfuffle. And everyone is just still like sorting everything out and figuring out what neat stuff could we do with this. I think what we'll find in the next few years is it starts to really solidify and there starts to become business models around the technology and operating models around the technology. We'll really see it start to spread. But right now, it just seems like a bunch of fires lit up across corporate America where people are, they're coming to the flame, they're checking it out, they're seeing what's going on, but it's not super solid yet.
Great points. And then, Diane, maybe you could jump in. How do you nurture the right innovation culture and behaviors?
Yeah, great question. So, similar to I think what Aisha is kind of articulating as well. We see a lot of interest really across the organization in all of these exciting new technologies and what they could mean for our company and for our customers. And so kind of making sure that you are stoking that fire of inspiration and aspiration, but keeping everybody focused on the job at hand and making sure that business operations and performance are continue to be, as expected. You need to be able to strike the right balance between inspiration, aspiration, kind of innovation, and making sure you have world-class performance in operations. And so we have, in our organization, we've developed an operating system, if you will. We refer to it as FastWorks. And we have really a network of resources that have organizationally from the leadership ranks out into all of the business units and operating groups. Everybody is following the same playbook, right? To very rapidly and systemically experiment with new technologies, new models, new products, new services, anchoring always on what the customers need, right? And validating what the customers need, and then experimenting with how we can rapidly and effectively develop new products, new services, new models, and introduce those to market as quickly as we can. So that is super high level, but that is our FastWorks operating system. We've developed it over the past 5 years, and we've deployed it really beginning at the leadership level, and then we've just embedded that FastWorks operating system in the way everybody works. And similar to Aisha's point, it's a network of support resources and systems and processes that we've implemented over time and refined over time. But again, this makes innovation everybody's day job in addition to the day job.
Which is great. I mean, a lot of times you hear that, to make innovation work, you need to have a dedicated team, right? But in the same token, ideas can come from everywhere. So, I mean, your model of having, everybody involved in innovation is clearly smart. It seems to me.
Yeah. And it's, just to add on to that too, we have, over time, we have been really focusing on building a community within the employee base using talent market models. So we have platforms and processes that are crafting our employee base, right, and our community into a more collaborative community using platform and process. Ideas do come from everywhere. Solutions come from everywhere, and so we have built a process to curate those ideas and that engagement amongst our employee community.
That's excellent to know. And Diane, can I ask you, can you test the mute? Because I know we still have the background sound. I just want to see if it might be coming from Miria. Do you have mute on?
I have it on mute. Yeah.
Yeah. I really do think what if the wires crossed or something? We've all tested. I don't know. But anyway, Joe, do you have anything you want to add? You're on mute, remember. So unmute. Tell me unmute. Oh.
How about now? Can you hear me coming through?
Much better.
Gotcha.
Perfect.
But I apologize for folks listening in on the background sound. It's none of us. So something happened, and the only way I'd be able to fix is we kick everybody out and we start all over. So I'm hoping it's not too bad. I have John here sitting here who will let me know if it's unmanageable. But at this point, I think we're going to have to roll. So I'll just ask the panelists to speak a little louder.
Sure.
And that way you hopefully hear us and not whoever else is having a big conference call in the background here. All right?
Sounds good.
Shoot, Joe.
Sounds good. We'll press forward. So, my background, I'm very much a geek. So I love playing with all of these new and emerging technologies. But over the course of my career, what I learned was that the people in the organization dimension is incredibly important to getting value out of your investments in a lot of these different arenas. And so one of the areas that I'm focused on researching right now is looking at kind of the implications of some of these technologies, and particularly automation and digital transformation, on how companies should think about organizing differently. And the sort of emerging themes that we're seeing are kind of this interplay between the culture that you cultivate, the talent that you go after, and the work environment that you provide that enables you to both kind of keep the machine running at the pace that it needs to keep up, but also to cultivate that ability to, at various different levels of the organization, to go after innovation is incredibly important. One of the things that I'm seeing is that there's this really interesting tension between looking for deep expertise versus generalists. And when we're in an environment of lots of new and emerging things, I think it's really helpful to have these sort of quote unquote T-shaped individuals that have a particular expertise, but are broad enough to be able to connect the dots between different areas. I'm constantly challenging teams at all levels of the organizations that I lead and run to think about how do you do the job that you're doing today in different and new ways that bring to bear a lot of these different technologies. And I think it's through lots of that decentralization, experimenting to both accomplish your mission and figure out how you can use these things, that kind of some of the leading ways of making good use of those technologies start to kind of rise to the top. So I think it's really interesting times. I think it provides a lot of opportunities for folks to explore, do things differently and new, to cultivate those cultures that enable people to do that. And then, the interesting thing is when you get into the ways of working, how, as you look at your corporate structures and the way that you place demands on teams, that you do so in a manner that doesn't kind of curtail that experimentation, that ability to find new ways of working that are going to ultimately be more successful for the corporation. So it's a really interesting time to try and balance across those different dimensions and find the right mix that works for you as a company that expresses your culture and identity, but also kind of enables you to take advantage of these new opportunities that are coming to the fore.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much change with the digital disruption, as everybody likes to say, and trying to see what's happening. It's interesting. We had one of our other hangouts was how do you create a culture of innovation? And Valerie Lancel of US Bank, talked about risk, right? And I think many people talk about you have to learn to accept risk and be okay with it. But she said, risk adverse companies need to shift to a culture that is supportive of risk, which is easier said than done, right? And really testing hypotheses. And this needs to come down from the top as well as middle management. And I just thought of that because, like Diane, when you were also talking about, innovation has to come everywhere and everyone has to be supportive of it. And, you need to have it work across the company. I think it's also at different levels, right? It really matters that people are in that mindset, and it's hard to get everyone thinking that way when they've got their core day job too.
I think, can I piggyback on that, Gretchen? It's easier for us to say about companies that have low risk appetites, like, guys, come on, jump in, go for it. But that is like a shallow answer, right? Because the long and short of it is that is not how companies change, right? So I'm sure there are many people listening right now who are in a situation where they might be dealing with some of these new technologies or innovation technologies in really risk adverse companies, because those risk adverse companies, by the way, they still think all the technology is really sexy. Just because they're risk averse doesn't mean that they don't understand that they have to go do all this stuff, right? It's just the path to get there is going to be very, very painful. So in those circumstances, I think it's easy for us to recognize that the experts we need are technology experts, right? Like, so in some of the organizations that I've worked in that are particularly exploring IoT, they know they need someone who knows a lot about IoT. What they're failing to recognize is that perhaps because they're risk adverse, they also need someone who is an expert at innovation and experimentation specifically, because that's going to be the data-driven activity that is going to comfort and relax the people who are risk adverse so that they can get on board with what the technical experts are coming up with, right? Because one of our big pitfalls when we're doing this type of work is we spend a lot of money on technical experts. They come up with some really neat, rad stuff that we're all excited about, and literally the organization isn't willing or cannot do it because they haven't really figured out a way not to go get it done, but to say, how are we going to carry people from being really risk adverse to this new thing. And experiments are such a good way to do that because they're very, very hard to, they're not subjective, right? If they're done correctly, they're not anecdotal. It's empiric evidence, and so they're a really critical part, I think, of these teams, particularly in risk adverse places. And I'm noticing they're not there. I'm noticing as these teams assemble, they've got their IoT experts and they've got their pro services experts. They've got all these experts except for the innovation experts and the like I said, specifically experimentation. So I've noticed that's a little bit of gap in this space, an organizational gap is, and we know we defer to technical experts, right? When we hire technical experts, the ecosystem around them goes, we hired you because you know something more than we do. And we're willing to listen. That's literally what we hired you for. That, I feel like, is the positioning you have to get in the group surrounding your projects about the experimentation expertise. Like, hey, we know we hired you to do something we don't know anything about, and we also know it's critical to do it to move forward. And so if we're going to navigate these spaces well, we've got to balance the technical expertise with the how you go get it done expertise. And that is beyond project management. That really, like I said, when it's new, you really have to get people who know how to experiment into the mix.
Yeah, just to piggyback that too, and it's an important point, and another consideration too for those risk adverse organizations. Oftentimes they are risk adverse because they're operating under a set of regulatory requirements that really force that diligence and that a more kind of thoughtful approach. So the adaptation of tools and methodologies and resources to fit within different regulatory kind of constraints and boundaries is important. So as these tools are matured and deployed more broadly across sectors, you have to be aware of the regulatory requirements that might apply to, say, a healthcare organization or maybe in different geographic jurisdictions. Those are key considerations that might factor into the innovation kind of model that can be deployed and how it's deployed.
A good point. So we're talking about the right behaviors, which I think are obviously critical, but sometimes it helps people to understand what's the wrong or not best practices. So what are the wrong innovation cultures and behaviors that pop up, Joe, that you're seeing, and how do you address them?
Yeah, I mean, so one of the you already alluded, Gretchen, to one of the behaviors that I've seen that I think kind of limits your ability to adopt an innovation culture. And that's the lack of kind of messaging and behaviors from the top that are supportive of it. So the sort of do as I say, not as I do type of mentality. So if you're going to move forward and embrace a culture where experimentation is acceptable, that needs to be supported by leadership. And if you aren't seeing that level of support, folks sort of see the response that leadership gives to different circumstances and will very quickly understand that the words are rhetoric and the behaviors haven't really shifted. And so it's incredibly important as you're trying to, change in an environment, say, of a risk-adverse culture, as we were just talking about, that it's very important for leadership to demonstrate that this is the way we're going to do things and to do things in these new ways, where we are going to experiment to determine what's the next step forward. And it's okay to fail as part of those experimentations because they give us data on what won't work. It's incredibly important for leadership to kind of lead the way forward for the organization there. When that's not present, that's where I've seen a lot of rhetoric around a desire to embrace innovation and a culture of of change that doesn't actually manifest because it's simply words and it's not actions. So that would be the element that I've seen as most problematic for folks trying to embark on these types of changes.
Yeah, excellent points. For the folks listening in, please be sure to submit any questions you have for the panel. Ask a question. Also, please engage in Twitter with us. We'd love to hear from you at altitude_inc. And what I'd also like to let you know is that we'll do about 15 to 20 more minutes of panel dialogue, and then we'll make sure to get your questions. So if you want to make sure we get to the most popular questions, be sure to vote on them. All right? And we'll try to get to all of them. Great. So thank you for joining all, and let's continue with our panel discussion. So Diane, love to hear from you. When did you realize you needed to focus a little more on innovation as a company-wide mindset, like you talked about earlier? Were you on the verge of being disrupted? Was there an aha moment? I don't know if you know some of the history with GE and how you've seen it evolve.
Yeah, GE is, I think, a really special story. We've always been an innovative company. I think the most noteworthy recent chapter in GE's story was about 5 to 6 years ago. And we also, I think, hit a milestone this past year with our CEO transition in the organization, and kind of looking forward into what's next. But if you think about GE's story about 5 to 6 years ago, plus or minus, we really made the commitment as an organization to move from an industrial organization to a digital industrial organization, to really embrace what the digital era could be and should be for our shareholders, our customers, and our organization. And that commitment, right, that moment in GE's history and GE's journey was one that it gave us permission, really, as an organization to enact a lot of change and to refresh the playbook. We really invested in processes and technologies. We unleashed a portfolio of experimentation across the company, which was really exciting, and it continues today. We've looked at just a multitude of new technologies and new business models, new markets. And I think for us, and really from my perspective, I think what has been most interesting for me in my observation is that the world is looking at all of these new emerging technologies, right? The disruptive technologies. And the world is focused on what those technologies can mean for all of us, whether it's AI, IR, VR, the acronym du jour, right? But the technologies are liberating for businesses and for industry and for commerce. But what is equally important, if not more so, is the talent side of that equation, right? So the talent and the technology need to move forward and mature and evolve in very close synchronization. And so that's at GE. That's really our focus at Genius Link is looking at what models we can put in place, what talent markets we can put in place in order to ensure that our talent side of the equation is pacing at the same pace as the technology, the digital transformation. So,
anyone else want to jump in here? Sure, I'll jump in. I'm happy to. So I think the point in my experience where I noticed kind of this need for this to not be kind of restrained to one area was as we were going through a project that I was on and looking at trying to instill kind of cultural dimensions in response to digital transformation, as well as how are we going to change the way that we work. And we kept running into certain constraints that the corporation placed upon teams, say, for example, the budgeting process, that was really out of step with how you'd want to do things in a more iterative fashion. And so it kind of dawned on us as we were trying to work through that and do as much as we could locally, that at some point, that larger organizational kind of push and openness to changing the way that you're doing things is important to really continue moving forward some of these transformations. So I think there's a ton that you can do locally within teams, but at some points you're going to start running into barriers if you don't have kind of this broader view towards driving a culture of innovation as something embedded within the overall structure and perspective of the leadership team, and a willingness to change things so that you can get after that. So that was where I came to that kind of realization through trying to move it forward with a particular client.
Yeah, it's interesting. Cisco is almost like the opposite, right? As their company, they started as technology disruptors, right? So their big question was not how do we create an innovative culture, is how do we keep an innovative culture, right? Because they had the startup innovation to begin with. And so, like I said, I've not been there very long, but as I talk to folks, what I see is it seems like they managed to keep it for a while. They grew away from it a little bit as they scaled in size as a company. They got like 80,000 people or something like that, right? So really big company. They lost it a little bit when we got big. And over, I would say, it sounds like for a while, let's say the last decade, they've been trying to bring back the really like important material, innovation, cultural kind of ethos that they had when they began, without any of the stuff they had to shed when they began, right? So the reason startup lose their innovative vibe is as they grow, innovation is really hard to scale in mass, right? That's the big thing everyone is jumbling with is how do we get everyone to do this? When you're little, that's easy. You can work as a very highly cooperative, very innovative ecosystem. As you scale, right, there's all kinds of things you lose as you get big. So to me, this question, when we talk about like the story of how companies become innovative or stay innovative, I think if you look at scale, you find that is probably the biggest factor in what dictates whether or not a company can really ingest innovation or anything as a cultural ethos. The long and short of it is, when you've got 80,000 people, that's a lot of people to convince, right? So I think the best tactic is to take bite-sized chunks, right? And obviously, and to work in much littler groups and ecosystems, and one ecosystem at a time, kind of bring them on board. And Cisco has been, this is part of why they have so many innovations groups. They have been great at that, right? They had that realization about a decade ago and started popping up all of these groups all over their organization. And it's interesting to me that after a decade, they haven't united them yet. Like in my brain, I think that they should come all together, right? But they're really good proof that no, you can kind of have a scattered innovation ecosystem with long fingers, right, that touch a bunch of people, and it's just as effective as something that might be like on scale and grandiose and singular, right? So it's they've really opened my eyes to the different ways that an ecosystem can exist and really kind of still make productive output.
Yeah. Very much so. And, we've had a lot of conversation about technology and how everything's evolving. And it really is amazing, all the changes just in the last couple of years. Now, Joe, can you talk about the evolution of technology and innovation really over the last few years, like we're talking about? How else has that changed the way like you or your team, folks at Accenture or even your clients, really, how are they working differently? Day to day? Yeah,
I mean, I think, I remember back when I started my career, there was a predictable way things were done. And we had a kind of set of tools that were industrialized and you could use reliably over and over again. And what I've noticed over the last 3 to 5 years is that because of the pace at which new things are coming out, a lot of that predictability is it's there to an extent. But in a lot of cases, we're having to, co-create the answers as we're going through it. And particularly if you move back to that notion of, as a team trying to figure out the most effective way to do the particular task in front of me and leveraging, new emerging technology that we're seeing, it sort of creates this interesting kind of struggle between industrialization and predictability on one hand, and then trying to experiment on the other. So from my perspective, as I've looked at how, this has changed the way that we're doing things on a day-to-day basis, it means that I'm scanning a lot more. So I'm looking for what are new opportunities that exist that we might be able to take advantage of. It means that the conversations I'm having with clients have changed. Where 10 years ago, it might have been, okay, here's our methodology and here's how we're going to move through all of the steps. And here's artifacts and examples that I can show you. It has become different. Yes, that still exists and is there, but we're much more interested in what's the better way to do it, and what is new and emerging that might be able to more effectively get us to the same endpoint faster and better. We can still fall back on that methodology and history, but we use each and every step along the way as an opportunity to figure out, are there better and more effective ways to do it? And that's, I think, just a mindset that I've tried to cultivate within the teams that I'm leading to try and drive things forward in that manner. So it is ultimately the same type of work at the end of the day, but it's what's new and what can we do differently that's going to produce a better outcome and answer, as we're doing our work. I look at it more as a mindset question as opposed to a specific technology that I'm employing, on a day in, day out basis. That's sort of the shift that I've observed over the last number of years.
Excellent. Diane, can you hear us?
I sure can. Absolutely.
All right. Do you want to jump in here?
Yeah. So
the evolution of technology.
The evolution of technology and the way that people work day to day.
Yep.
Yeah. So I think I would just echo a lot of what we've just heard from Joe and Aisha. We have a, similar to what I was explaining earlier, we have seen a lot of really excitement around the new business models, the new technologies, et cetera, and a lot of experimentation. Again, we're a large, complex organization, a lot of distributed teams, and so the deployment of the FastWorks operating system gave a lot of structure, right, to those teams and a lot of tools and support resources to those teams so that they could both be comfortable with experimentation and iteration, but also get the resources and the support that they need. So launch, learn, and refine has become kind of our doctrine within the organization, so that we anchor once again, we anchor on the customer's needs. We experiment, we validate that the customer, we're developing new innovations that are aligned with customer value, and we rapidly pace those to market. And it's been a journey for us. We've perfected that model over the past several years, and I think we'll continue to see an evolution of that operating model. And certainly, I think as an organization, we need to make sure that we're investing our innovation activities on those things that matter most to our shareholders, our customers, and our business. So it's a constant refinement, kind of aligning the strategy, the innovation investments to the execution. But that scanning process that Joe mentioned earlier is absolutely critical.
Yeah. Can I pipe in, Gretchen? I don't know if we have time. The biggest change I've seen is, and this will be for folks who are starting innovation in their organizations. There is no way for innovation groups to work any way but iteratively. There is no such thing as a waterfall innovation project. So the biggest change I've seen day to day is reconciling an iterative project inside of an organization that still works with waterfall. So if those are weird words for you, iterative means we try, we learn, we iterate, we try it again. Waterfall means we plan a big thing, we go do it all, and then we end, which is like the traditional project management model. So the biggest, if I had to note like one single big change, it is these, if you're in a waterfall organization, innovation works differently. And you really have to figure out how you're going to mesh those two together, because the organizational expectations will be that, you're just going to work like how Waterfall works. That's what they're going to expect. So if you've got sponsors, if you've got project team members, and they have never worked in an iterative style before. And so Agile is the most commonly recognized iterative framework. I shy away from that a little bit, the word Agile, because people know now it's a buzzword. So if you say, do you know anything about Agile? You know what they tell you? Oh yeah, I know all about it. And the deal is, no, they don't. So what we really want to know is, have you iterated and experimented before? That's the big question. And then I frame the whole thing around the concept of experimentation, because it's usually the new thing they haven't done before. Waterfall doesn't have anything in their methodology around experimentation. So no one can ever come back and say, this is the way we do it. There is no version of it. And I would say that's what you probably get. People are curious about experimentation right now, right? Like it's something that is sexy that they'll come to the table for. So that's the biggest change I've seen, and the biggest tip I have is to talk more about experimentation and iteration than Agile versus Waterfall. Although that is the two methodologies you could hold up to say are somewhat opposing at this point.
It's a good point, and it's semantics, right? But experimentation is much more accessible, right? Yeah. So Agile sounds very much like a technology community activity, but experimentation, really anybody can play, right? So and that kind of opens up the landscape of innovation to anyone, right? It doesn't matter what your functional discipline, you can experiment, right? And are encouraged to do so. Failure, also kind of along the same lines of experimentation, right? Failure is almost a badge of honor with innovators, but that is also a little bit more regionally focused, right? So there are some regions where failure is not the badge of honor that it might be, say, in North America. And so you have to be aware of those cultural kind of nuances as well when you're trying to build an enterprise and organization of innovation.
Yeah, great point. Yeah, Cisco sees it a little bit, right? We're multinational. And so it's interesting. There are some cultures who put us to shame, right? They're like, why aren't you experimenting with everything? And there are other cultures where experimentation is super scary, right? So when we've got this, like multinational teams, you definitely have to recognize that their country's corporate culture is different than ours, and definitely significantly contributes to this for sure, because this is one of those uncomfortable emotional spaces.
Right.
It's interesting. We're having a few phantoms happen with this hangout. I disappeared for a little bit. I know Diane, you did. So maybe because it's 21st and people are envious, we've almost made it through 21 of these. I don't know. But
no one wants them to end, Gretchen. That's it. It's because it's the last one, and the gods are telling you, we love this.
No, this is crazy.
That's right.
Oh my goodness, Diane, if you can make your face in the frame, it would be better for the record. But frankly, right now, we'll take what we can get. Okay. So let's take a little deviation here. Are there any hard lessons learned really from the process that we should watch out for, right? I mean, I think we've talked some about them, about risk and whether everybody in the company is doing innovation or not, but are there specifics? Think almost checklist oriented. And I don't know, Joe, if you want to jump in here.
Sure. So, from a checklist perspective, I think it's important that, you're looking at I look at it going down through the elements that I outlined earlier. So how does your culture interact with your ability, with the conversation we're just having in terms of, am I in a waterfall cultural environment and I'm trying to do experimentation? I'm going to come up against a number of objections and roadblocks along the way that I'm going to have to navigate. So it's important to understand that cultural context. As you look at, the talent within your organization, how are we using the talent? Are we valuing, from an organization perspective, deep expertise? Are we valuing people who are going to look, before them and after them to understand kind of the implications of their activity within the value chain of the company? And then, from a ways of working perspective, do we have, the means of executing in these ways that, as we talk about innovation, we're necessarily doing something that hasn't been done before? And so how does our way of working support and cultivate an opportunity to to execute in a new way, which may be uncomfortable, may have us, we will, as we're going through this, we will experiment, and we're going to learn from that experimentation. We will need to make sure that our means of working provides enough guardrails and opportunity for that experimentation to take place. So I kind of look at the world through those three dimensions first, and then whatever opportunity we're trying to deploy. You can look at the specifics for that functional domain, that technology space, those sorts of things.
That's interesting. Lisa of American Greetings was on our how to create a culture of innovation hangout that I'd mentioned earlier. And it was interesting. She talked about, the true shift in culture happens when money and people are assigned to innovation, right? It's back what we said earlier. You've got a dedicated team, and she said, really, they do need to be dedicated, not the partial jobs, right? Which we all see that, right? Everybody tries to say make 20% of someone's job be innovation, but they're still going back to the core because that's where the ROI and usually where their goals are, et cetera. But anyway, she was saying versus partial jobs or shared budgets, because they all compete for proven ROI. And with innovation, sometimes it's hard and it takes time to get that proven ROI, right? So, people go back to what they're goaled on, which is usually more measurable. So, it's an interesting reminder, I think, for all of us. So with the essence of time, because I want to get to people's questions, I'm just going to ask just a couple quick questions more of the panelists. We'll do a wrap, and let's get to the questions. All right. So Diane, we're glad you're back, by the way. Thank you for keep reconnecting. And would love to hear from you the top 3 tools you would recommend for folks for innovation strategy design. This is a little bit about design, right? So, and we'd had that question previous Hangouts, and I promised we'd ask.
Yeah, so top 3 tools from my perspective are leverage a talent market model. So you don't have all the brightest minds on your team. You may have very bright minds on your team, but not all of them. So leverage a talent market approach. Use crowdsourcing, whether it's within your organization or outside of your organization. So that's the best tool. The FastWorks model that we have been discussing, right? The launch, learn, refine, integrate experimentation in your operating culture. That gives your team the permission to test, refine, and move fast. And then really a lot of the I think this is going to sound very basic, but the use of customer journey maps and anchoring on your customers' needs. So customer empathy and customer journey maps, and anchoring all of your innovation efforts on the needs and the interests and preferences of your customers is those 3 I would say are absolutely critical to success.
Yeah, those are definitely ones we see a lot of people lean on, and I hear FastWorks is a fabulous process. So I'm going to continue here because I do want to do a wrap here. I do want to ask this next question. It was asked in the last Hangout also, and I'd committed to getting it in here. So can you recommend frameworks? And Aisha, maybe jump in here a little, and Diane, if you have anything to add, or Joe. But can you recommend frameworks right now that are really going to help with design principles to better understand the possibilities that that are out there?
Yeah. So I don't consider design thinking a framework. I consider it a methodology. But within the design thinking world, I am super in love with Alex Osterwalder's tools. I love the business model canvas and the value proposition canvas. I think if you are at that place where you're beginning innovation and you don't necessarily feel like an expert, you've been at it, because this is how this works, right? So to the previous comment we have, it is fantastic when we have dedicated money and resources for innovation, but that's not the start of innovation. The beginning of innovation is we cobble together a few people for the first time to start having some conversations and trying some stuff out. So if you find yourself in that position, you're interested in innovation, now you've been, for whatever reason, elevated into the space, either because you volunteered or you were asked to, now you need tools to rally people into the correct mindset so that the team can kind of move forward. And I find Alex's tools excellent. The business model canvas is great for if you have an idea and you're trying to figure out how it fits a market and fits a company and you want to figure out what your business model strategy is going forward, period. And the value prop canvas is fantastic for connecting any innovation effort to what your customer needs. And those are really the two big things you need to do when you start innovation. The first one is, who are we? And who do we want to be in the world? That's your business model canvas. And then you got to get down to, what do our customers need and how are we going to do it? And that's your value prop canvas. I believe with those two tools, and they're super flexible. You can read a book. Everyone can find it on Amazon. If you don't know what I'm talking about, they have a website. You read a book and you give a start. And I think also, Gretch, companies like Altitude, I'm going to do a little shameless pitching for you guys right now. In the very, very beginning, I think getting folks to help you at least begin these conversations that have done it before, and know kind of the emotional pitfalls and the people pitfalls, super helpful. You don't have to keep them on forever, but at least to form your own thinking and your own team's thinking. I think they are, groups like yours are really, really critical to wrapping your head around a big information set really quickly and having really good, reasonable tools to bring out to folks.
So Aisha, you have incredible passion and we love the energy, but people couldn't capture all that because it was so quick. So if you could, if anyone else has something to add, if you could go in the chat and just name drop a few things so people could look it up, that would be great.
You got it. Got it right now.
That was really good info. Diane, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, Aisha listed them. So the business model canvas for tool, right? And just absolutely an essential, right? I mentioned earlier, you've got to reach out to, you have to curate the right community, whether it's partners or a community of advisors and experts. You need to curate a community of trusted resources with and outside of your operating organization in order to kind of guide and validate and ultimately launch your innovation efforts. So model approach is absolutely critical. There are a lot of platforms and tools and providers in this space that you can leverage, but it is absolutely critical to take a community-based approach to innovation. It's the only one. That's the only way you're going to get the intellectual kind of reach and diversity and the speed that you need to be successful in this digital era.
Great. Lots of great information. I absolutely thank our panelists. What I'm going to do is have each panelist go around very briefly, like I do in every Hangout. Top 2 takeaways you want to make sure the audience remembers. Of course, we want them to remember everything other than the background noise, but we really, really, really would like to have top 2 takeaways. I'm going to ask each panelist to go around quickly so then we can jump to questions. Okay? So Joe, let's bring you back in the conversation. What's your top 2?
So I love the opportunities provided by these emerging technologies and trends, but ultimately we got to also focus on the people side, and so looking at culture, talent, and ways of working is incredibly important. So as you're looking at setting up your environment, make sure you're paying attention to those and getting those elements advanced at the same pace as your technology and other items.
Great. Aisha.
Don't mistake your sponsor's enthusiasm for your technology as good sponsorship. They may not have ever done anything like this before. They have never worked in an iterative space before, so they might not know how to be sponsors, particularly if they've only sponsored waterfall type efforts. So it's going to be your job, if you're the person who's in charge of the innovation effort or project, to kind of bring them on board and make sure that they know what to expect and how to sponsor an iterative environment appropriately. And that could be side research, right? So if you don't know how to recommend they do that, that's research you can do on your own. It looks and feels a little bit different than the sponsorship for waterfall.
Excellent. And Diane.
So crowd power your innovation operations, right? So don't let yourself be kind of constrained by traditional approaches to resourcing your innovation operations. The talent side, back to Joe's earlier point, we believe very strongly that while the technology is important for digital transformation, the talent side of that equation is equally, if not more important. So do not ignore the talent side of the digital transformation and the innovation operations. Solve for that talent side and crowd power your innovation operations.
Excellent. I mean, honestly, this is wonderful input, and I hope the folks listening in find it beneficial. And I am going to jump right to the questions. Ask a question. We'll start with the ones with the most votes. I think the first one has been answered a little bit by Diane. Maybe you could elaborate. this a little further. It is, how are your innovation teams structured and where do they fit in the organization?
Great question. Our innovation teams are distributed across the company, as you might imagine, with a company as large and complex as ours is. As I mentioned earlier, we have a chief innovation officer at the helm, kind of leading the innovation ship, if you will. We have underneath that, we have innovation teams across the company. So we have product management teams that have their own innovation processes. We have engineering teams, technology teams that have their own innovation processes, so NPI processes. We also have a global research center headquartered in Schenectady, and we have kind of satellite organizations, global organization kind of world, but the global research really early. Almost scientific research arm of our innovation.
Oh, we started to lose. I think we got most of the answer there. If there's other questions related, let me know. I'm going to go to the next question because I do think we talked a little bit about it through the Hangout. Aisha, would you be comfortable answering the next one, which is, how is innovation funded and how is it justified from an ROI standpoint?
Yeah. So at Cisco, innovation is funded by the operational group that the innovation team is nestled under. So we are like a group of internal consultants, right? So our team looks exactly like a normal pro services group, or probably pretty similar to like Altitude works too, right? So you have consultants and folks that help underneath them. And then we are available to the senior leaders in that operational group to work on projects. So the funding comes through project funding, right? The project gets funded. Once it gets funded, then it comes to us to kind of help and consult. There are some independent funding options at Cisco. They are really, really great at putting aside money for crowdsourcing and for open innovation. So there's a couple different ways it might go down. 80% of the time, though, it is a project. We're working on one right now in IoT. A project has been funded, not 100% funded because we don't 100% know what we're doing yet, right? We got to design some stuff. But the initial funding has come through just through the regular project management, governance, and then they get the resources assigned. Very different from when, like, for example, they run open innovation, which, that they crowdsource the ideas and they just have a bucket of money, let's say $200,000. And whoever wins has to figure out how to utilize that money. May or may not be enough to cover, the expenses of what they have in mind to put in place. So a couple different ways they get cash going.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I'll tell you, the next question is interesting. Every Hangout, we get questions about skills and how do you get them and how do you vet them. So, Joe or Aisha, if you want to jump in, what are the hiring criteria to staff for an innovation culture? And also, Kevin had also added that he'd like to know, are there skills that are inherent that can't be taught, and can anybody be trained? So love to hear thoughts there.
So I'll jump first. The one that comes most readily to mind on that front is empathy. I think a lot of what is going on in innovation is understanding who your who is and what their whys are. So, understanding the audience you're trying to make their life better and what is it that they're looking to accomplish. And so whether it's using the business model canvas or value prop canvas or other tools to help structure that thinking, it fundamentally is an exercise in empathy of understanding how are you changing things in a way that are going to be beneficial for that audience. The second element that I would add to that is sort of this ability to think about the problem set and then reframe it in a new way to open up adjacent spaces. So if you can find folks who are talented at that kind of a thought pattern, that tends to be good. I tend to believe that a lot of this comes down to, therefore, more softer skills, cultural fit, as opposed to specific functional or technical skills that you're looking for. I find that functional or technical skills are much easier to teach than some of those softer skills. And so that's what I would encourage folks to be looking for in their hires. Aisha, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Totally. Yeah, innovation is all about the soft skills. So the good news about innovation being all about the soft skills is you don't need a whole lot of innovation experience to get hired as one. I hire people all the time that have never worked in innovation ever. The bad news about that is if you don't have them, those soft skills, a little tough to give them to you, and also tough to find in an interviewing process. But as Joe said, empathy is right up there. Liking to disrupt people. Here's the deal. As an innovation person, you're going to cause a kerfuffle. If that's not your bag, if that doesn't make you all excited, this is not for you. So you have to kind of get something out of the disruptive energy, which is not always positive, by the way. In fact, I would say like largely not positive, right? Innovation experts worked as, my boss calls them Sherpas. We're process Sherpas. We are here to bring people along the way. So if you're not a humanist, if you're not empathetic, if you don't like disruption, this is just going to be the most tedious job you ever did in your life. But if you're in all of that, right? If you're a people person, you're super empathetic, you love to explore, you love to get people excited, then this is something to kind of check out. And once you're in this space, you'll learn. Someone asked, like, are there core things you need to know how to do? I think facilitation is really high up there. I use my facilitation skills literally every day, whether I'm facilitating formally or not. So if there was any one skill set that I would say, like, oh, you could go get, and then that would be really appealing for people hiring in an innovation job, that's one of them. Not a lot of people have it, formal training or examples of doing, and there's a little bit of skill involved there. So that is definitely something you could cultivate for yourself that would make you more appealing in the innovation hiring process, at least for me. I don't know, Joe, if you guys feel the same way.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And, I want to see the energy and the attitude, and that's what I tend to look for. And, I can teach people a lot if those elements are present. If they're not there, that's where I think, no amount of technical good is going to help in a lot of cases. So
I agree.
Great. For the folks listening in, I know we've gone a little bit over, which is my first time in 21 Hangouts. If the panelists are okay, I'm going to ask 2 more questions and then we'll call it a wrap. That's okay.
Happy to.
Is there a lot of questions?
It's the last one, Gretchen.
Yeah, come on, great finale.
Let's do it. All right.
Cool. Thanks for being on board. So there's a question here from Sam. How does your company create a growing culture of innovation? Now, we've talked a lot about this, I believe, but I believe what they want is more specific examples. So if you have any specifics, whether it's make sure executives on board or whatever it might be, I think that's what they're looking for.
Empathy grooming tools are really important to me to kind of pick. So as a practitioner, you need to have empathy, but then you also need to recognize that that's special and that most people don't have a ton of it, particularly not at work, because corporate America does not encourage empathetic behavior. So if we're not talking about starting an innovation program, we're just, what can you as a person do to make your ecosystem more innovative? Start practicing and apostolizing empathy. That alone will make a giant difference. Empathy towards your customer, by the way, not empathy for each other. That's great. We love each other. Yay, group hug. But who we really want to shift the focus to is our customer. So anything that you can do that lets your group get to know your customer more and can bring that message into your project will start to feel more innovative. And that's probably the simplest, easiest, don't require sponsorship, doesn't require anyone's permission, doesn't go get yourself an empathy building tool. Like I said earlier, the business model canvas and the value prop canvases are great ones. Clay Christensen's Jobs to Be Done is a great one. I mean, if you just Google empathy building tools for corporate America, you will get pages of stuff. Go find one that you like and start trying it. That's probably the number one thing that an individual person in a company could do to kind of boost the general innovative feel around them.
Yeah, a good point. All right, I'm going to have 2 more questions here and then we'll wrap. Kevin has put in a few here, so let's be sure to get to one of Kevin's. Thank you, Kevin. So while disruptive technologies or disruptive innovation often gets all the attention, yes, we have talked about that today, often adapting technologies from adjacent industries can often create the biggest impact with the least effort. Can you give thoughts on how to balance the portfolio of innovation activities?
I think a lot of the scanning, the way I think about scanning for opportunities is looking for cross-domain applications, where I'm seeing something being applied in a different domain that we can use in the context of the client situation I'm helping with. And so I think that I agree with the sort of, cross-domain applications as being a very strong opportunity pool for, innovating new ways of doing things, a very strong candidate. So for me, I think I deploy that mostly in the way that I scan for opportunities to try and bring forward. So that's my take on that.
Yep. Excellent. I'm going to just jump. One last question here is, because we've talked a little bit about it, and then I noticed a question came in after we referenced it. So do you think a company can succeed without a dedicated innovation team?
Like as a company, can you succeed? Sure. As a really innovative company, can you succeed? No, I'm not so sure, right? I don't have a whole lot of opinion on what that dedicated group needs to look like. But if innovation groups pop up because companies aren't innovative, if they were innovative, they wouldn't need an innovation group, right? So the idea is can you do it without dedicating time, money, and resources? Possibly. You'll have an innovation people will never tell you can't do something. So FYI. So could that happen? Maybe. Have I ever seen it happen in the 10 years I've been doing this across like 6 or 7 different companies? Nah, no. Without, it starts off somewhat dedicated. Like I said, you borrow people time and money to get it going. That's the little baby nugget it starts at. But once you start to seriously commit to this, you're going to, like anything. Can you have a finance department? I mean, can you have a finance worker without a finance department? Everyone would have to know finance. You know what I mean? Like I'm not quite sure you can do it any other way.
Yeah. And I think, Aisha, maybe that's where that scaling of the size of your business really comes to the fore, right? So as a small startup environment,
true,
you can get by. But as you scale to a larger corporation, I think it becomes something that if you don't focus on it, you're unlikely to get the outcomes, as you were saying. Yeah, great point. Yeah, small companies don't need to worry about this quite as much as big companies do.
Yeah. So we have now done our record-long hangout. So thank you all for hanging in. Thank you to our panelists. Really appreciate it. Aisha from Cisco, Joe from Accenture, and the phantom person we can't see, Diane from GE. I absolutely thank you all for joining. Excellent input. I asked the folks who have hung in there this whole time to know that on our website, altitudeinc.com, we have the 21 records, or we will have this one soon, of all the hangouts. Remember, I mentioned in the beginning, the record of this one will not come Monday like they typically do. A week from Tuesday it will be, because our editing folks are on vacation and they're allowed to be after all these hangouts. So again, I appreciate all the time. Please go to our website for more valuable free resources. And thank you, everybody. Appreciate it. And you'll get the record a week from Tuesday. Thank you. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.